The San Jose Earthquakes at the halfway point of the season with plenty to unpack. They put together an impressive 8-game unbeaten streak in May, only for it to be snapped in really painful fashion against St. Louis, a 2-1 loss sealed by a late defensive lapse. While the ending was pretty tough to swallow, there's no denying how far this team has come in just 17 games this season. My name is Kevin, I'm joined by Luis, and together with the Quakes-holics. In this video, we'll take a brief look at the St. Louis match and then dive into the bigger picture, handing out our mid-season report card for the Quakes. So yeah, we're a couple days late on the St. Louis match analysis, and part of that is just life, and part of that is also just us not really knowing what to really talk about, because I feel like this game was definitely a rotation game. We played 9 games in the whole month of May. That is 9 games in 30 days. That's honestly way too many games. So we kind of knew at the start of the month that eventually we're going to get one of these games where we see a heavily rotated team, and we saw that against New England, and now we saw that again against St. Louis. First half, the Quakes kind of looked like they were able to hang in there. We went down a goal early, and then in the second half we rotated in regular faces that we've been seeing all season, and once we had our starters, we definitely took control of the game, looked a lot better, and then unfortunately we concede very late a penalty kick, and that's the game, 2-1, right? Small moments define the game. But yeah, given that it wasn't the regulars playing, given there's so many other matches, I just feel like reaching conclusions is, I don't know, it doesn't seem right. But Luis, I feel like you have different thoughts on this, so let us know what you think.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying generally. However, of course, I think not a lot, but there were some few individual errors which just cost us getting anything away from St. Louis. Both the goals really that they scored were pretty ugly. Romney just gets bodied off the ball by João Klaus. How many times have we seen João Klaus body someone off the ball against us? It's pretty annoying, to be honest, at this point, but yeah, just gets beat with the ball over the top. Romney probably should have come off his line and been more alert to the danger. He rushes out and honestly kind of makes a fool of himself a little bit. He's put in a bad position, but he jumps, and the Klaus realizes that, shoots it from under him. And in the second goal, kind of a similar situation, but with Reed Roberts on the other side, where again, there's an individual error from a center back, and then it puts Edwards in a precarious situation. He dives at the player after he makes the cross, and it's a penalty. And it's annoying because we had equalized, especially on the back of such a great month, 8 games unbeaten. But overall, the most important thing is we're getting a rest now. And yeah.
And I feel that it's really annoying to see individual errors cost us games. We've seen this plenty last year. We've seen it a couple times this year. But overall, when you look at the bigger picture, it's not that big of a deal. We've won the important games, and it is what it is. It happens, right? But okay, switching gears to what we actually wanted to talk about. It's June, halfway through the season, and in the spirit of school being out, people get the report card. So we thought, okay, what if we just gave our mid-season report card for the Quakes? So we have 4 categories to give grades on. The grading scale is your typical A to F with plus or minuses, but we'll be giving 2 grades. The first is a raw or like more objective grade, and then a curved grade. Now that I've used the word objective, I don't know how objective it really is. I mean, this is all subjective, right? It's just our opinions. But if you're not familiar with curved grades, it's basically like an adjusted grade after taking into account additional context. Again, it's subjective, but so is everything, right? So first category, how the Quakes did in May. Okay. I was thinking about, okay, how can I give a raw grade for the Quakes? And so what I did was I actually took a look at, okay, at the end of April, that was match day 10, where were the Quakes? And then where are the Quakes at after match day 17. In total, we went up 4 positions and we played 9 games, 7 MLS games, 2 Open Cup games, which we won both of those. If you look at then every team's points between match day 10 and match day 17, you'll see that the Quakes actually went up 12 points, which is amongst the higher end of the teams. All this is to say, we did this calculation and we basically reached what is called points per game. And if we rank that from best to worst, the Quakes actually did pretty well in May. Placed 6th in that ranking, and again, this is only Western Conference. So 1.71 points per game, if you multiply that by 34, which is how many games are in a season, you get something like 60 points, as like a projection, which isn't a perfect representation of what's actually going to happen, right? But 60 points, that's pretty dang good. If you compare that to the 2024 MLS standings, that would have put us, I believe, at either 3rd or 4th in the West. That is a position where you host an MLS playoff game. So you look at just that form and you say, wow, we actually had a very good form in the month of May. So with all that in mind, based on them being 6th, based on seeing these projections, these numbers, I thought as like a raw grade, I would give them a B-. Yes, I know I just hyped up the Quakes and then gave them a B-, which sounds pretty bad. But again, that's just like my idea of like the Raw. But then I thought, okay, the Quakes did play 2 Open Cup games and they won both of those games, and we called both those games must-win games, and we called the Galaxy away game, the Cali Classico, a must-win game, and the Quakes did perform really well, and they won all of the most important games. Really, we lost the game that I would say is the least important on the road against St. Louis. It's whatever to me, honestly. And then I did basically another points per game comparison with these like fantasy Open Cup game points, basically giving 3 points if you won, or 1 point if you drew at the end of the 90 minutes, because there's obviously no extra time in MLS games. And I was actually surprised that despite adding these points, the Quakes kind of kept their same position and points per game at 1.78, which again is very good. But originally I thought, we should probably be higher than that. But anyways, given that context, given that we won the important games, my adjusted for May, I think I'd put the Quakes at a solid A.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So for me personally, I think that we are interestingly, I'm actually above you in like the raw grade. I gave the Quakes probably like a B plus, maybe a B at the lowest, but I would give them an A minus, even on the curved one. For me, I think that an A means you're virtually spotless. So pretty tough to get an A. That being said, again, I agree with you. I think, we did really well, of course. We were undefeated up until the last match day in May. We overall went 5 wins, 3 draws, only 1 loss. We are into the quarterfinals of the Open Cup. We knocked out our bogey team in Sacramento, which was a really pleasant thing to witness. And we also beat Portland. Honestly, for me as a fan, probably the highlight of my season. In terms of just, how back and forth it was. This was such a gritty game, but to get out on top and the way that we did with the heart that we gave, I think was fantastic. So overall, like you say, fantastic game. But what kind of draws back from them getting that, spotless A is the way we gave up certain points in certain games. St. Louis being one of them. And I also think, if I'm being completely honest, the Houston game was also not great. I think that it is positive that we were, of course, losing 2-0. To come back to be 3-2 at one point is fantastic and shows that this team can come back from losing positions. Something that I think we had some questions about as well, given the way that Bruce Arena sets up the team. But to then give that final goal away at the end and equalize after winning, feeling like we had like that Goonies moment after, not really having a true Goonies game in so long. I think it was best summed up by the look that Bruce Arena gave to his technical staff. I kind of looked at him and I just saw him throw his notebook in the air, give this wry smile, kind of ironic smile to his technical staff, and just realize, which I think really personified the feeling we had as fans. And I mean, I definitely had. It was just like, okay, bro, like, yeah, that was disappointing. And I think that is a mark off, which just barely takes away from that spotless A. So I think A minus, though, is very merited for how good they've been this month.
I respect the A minus. I still do think that you don't need perfection for an A. And while I do agree that, yes, the Quakes have given up points in the last moments of the match, I still think that winning a derby on the road, winning the 2 must-win games that were the Open Cup, tying against Inter Miami with, I mean, arguably the best player of all time, right, Lionel Messi. I think if you look at the highs of this team and the crucial games that we had to play and win, the Quakes did deliver on that. And I do think that it's worth noting that there was no other team that had as congested of a schedule as we did, and we still did really well. And yes, I know what you're saying about New England game. Some people were saying, oh, we should have won that game because we're so bad, and as well as the St. Louis game. But remember, we played MLS games with players who are not regular MLS starters. We played those games with players that we drafted this year. And the fact that we can still rotate and get the result in New England, and yeah, the first half we go down against St. Louis, but to then be able to sub in players and, capture that game back. And I mean, I just feel like we saw every good thing that a team needs, right? You win your derbies, you win the knockout games. If you're trailing, you sub in players that make an impact on the game that can get you back in. I don't know. I think that has a lot more merit than, sure, we conceded a penalty kick in the ninth game across a 30-day stretch because, we played, not to call him out and throw him under the bus, but like Reed Roberts just did not look good on that last play and he's not a starter. And so, I don't know. I just think about the moments that we had to win, we won. And for that reason, it's an A. But I understand your argument.
All right, well, to the next one, overall grade for the season. Personally, I would say like raw score C plus, maybe B minus. But I would give them a solid B in terms of the curve score. I think it's been a good season for sure. The Earthquakes have had some great players, especially up top. The team has demonstrated great depth, especially in the month of May, which we have just gone into, which is a testament to Bruce Arena's roster management, and the firepower of this team is impressive. And that's been demonstrated by us leading the league in goals. However, I do think it's a bit easy to get carried away with the performance of the team because of the context of how bad the team performed last season, especially our defense, which, to be honest, was awful. There's no other way of putting it. That being said, I think we've done so much better this season. And not only that, but we're still playing, obviously, as the statistics suggest, aggressive, entertaining offensive soccer. We're not afraid to press up high. We're not afraid to go up and attack and, just, go for it. And we're also not afraid to play a high line. And I think that's fantastic. Seventh place with 22 points after 17 matches also puts us well within playoff contention. With that being said, I still think, as I previously mentioned, the defense is a concern of mine. We are tied for the second most goals conceded in the West, and we have dropped points in games we would have expected probably a bit more from, especially games like Houston, which I just mentioned, the Rapids at home, and Kansas at home as well, which was a pretty ugly game. The game in Charlotte. So I think there have been a few moments where the defense has looked shaky, has looked frustrating, but overall, I think it's been a solid season, and they definitely deserve a solid B at minimum when you take into consideration the performance that they had last season.
We actually had the exact same raw grade score. I also had them at a C plus for pretty similar reasons. It feels good to be, in a playoff position halfway through the season, but it isn't secure by any means. And I think what the Quakes didn't do very well on in the beginning of the season is not capitalizing on how many home matches we had. And despite that, we went on 2 separate 3-game losing streaks. And so while, yes, the month of May looks really, really good, the overall, it's just, we have more to desire. And we played a lot of games, like you mentioned, that statistically we should have gotten a result from, and we just didn't. For that reason, yeah, C plus is the raw. And then similar to your reason, I did give them an A minus for the state of the club. Maybe I was just a little bit, rose-tinted glasses, right? Still mentally and spiritually hungover from the Cali Clasico win. If you compare to where the Quakes were at last year, like it were just levels above where we were. And yes, we're still leaky and defensively, but we've definitely overcompensated with the goals scored, right? So for that reason, I feel good. And we are now in the quarterfinals of the U.S. Open Cup as well, which we haven't been able to see in a long time. So there's a lot of upside to this season, but the standings are holding us down in the raw grade.
Like I was talking about, you do kind of want to give them a higher grade because of how poor we were last season. But I also think, it's important to look at the roster we have. Like, this is a strong roster. So I think it's fair to expect, where we are, playoff contention, to expect to be in the race, to expect to be, dominating teams at home, ideally, and, getting results or at least being competitive away from home as well.
On the topic of players, that's a pretty good transition to now the grades for the transfers. So in terms of signings, before the season start, we got Chicho, Joseph, Ian Harkes, Dave Romney, Mark Anthony Kay, Earl Edwards Jr., and Nick Lima. And then I think it was after match day 10, if I'm not mistaken, that we picked up DeJuan Jones from Columbus Crew. And then we also had some draft picks. We had Bo LaRue, who's become a regular for the Quakes, Floriani, and Roberts. For this one, my raw and my curve were actually the same. And it was an A. I think the fact that we have two big name strikers that for stretches of the season were in Golden Boot race contention, and I'm pretty sure Chicho still is in the upper echelon of that race. Joseph has fallen back, but he has been injured for a couple games. He's been out with national team duty, but he also did pick up his hat trick, right? So we have a lot of goals in our strikers. Harkes and LaRue, they are the engines of this team. They run the midfield. DeJuan Jones comes in. We go on an 8-game unbeaten streak. And really the only quote unquote downsides that I see of these like new names, Edwards has been heavily criticized by fans, and I understand that. But I do also think, as we've said multiple times, that the defense hasn't set him up the best. And to that end, I do think that of all these names, I do think Reed Roberts has definitely looked shaky at times. Maybe that's just because of, recent memory with the St. Louis game. But despite that, I think that's more than understandable given his age. You don't really expect draft players to come in and make this huge difference, right? Like, not everyone's going to be Wando and not everyone's going to be Bo LaRue. I think those are exceptions, not the rule. So I think given all these players that have come in, given the expectations based off of their reputation or their salary or their experience, I think they have lived up to that expectation and they've put the Quakes in a really good position.
Yeah, definitely agree. I didn't even make a distinction between the curved and the raw grade. I just put A. But for the money that we paid, if we paid money at all, we have had exceptional returns from our incomings. When you think of, like you mentioned, LaRue, Romney, Jones, Chicho, these guys are probably the first 6 or 7 players in the starting 11 when everyone's fit. And yeah, to shout out those draft players like you mentioned, I think Floriani has also been really good. I keep going back to it, but that game against Portland, I'm pretty sure he definitely played the majority of the match. I don't think he played like all the way to the 114th minute, but I thought he was so good. He was so good in Portland, where we're sending balls over the top, but he looked good. And the other games in MLS, he's also looked really good. I feel comfortable with him. I feel, like he's sound, like we're not, dragging someone along. And yeah, of course, there's some players like Reed Roberts that still are in that developmental phase, but yeah, and like Bo LaRue, right? Like, just fantastic. And to go back to the money as well that was involved to get Chicho for installment payments of what, 500,000 this year, next year, is for one of the best attackers in the league, is great business, and it's made me not really miss any of the outgoings, especially considering the amount of turnover we had in the offseason. I think it's been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we had the same letter grade, so I don't have any rebuttals to make to your claims. I'm actually surprised that we actually nailed at least one of these categories.
Yeah, and well, for the last incoming big name that we had, or the first one actually we had in the offseason, of course, is Bruce Arena. Personally, I gave him. I didn't really just make a distinction between the raw. I'd probably say like a raw, maybe a B, and then the curved one I would say is a little bit higher. I'd probably give him a B plus at the end of the day. I think Bruce Arena has done a very good job at managing this roster. He's not only been able to incorporate players who fans would not have expected to be as reliable as they are at the beginning of the season, but he has also been able to create a lineup that, for the most part, gets the best out of everyone. A lot of fans, ourselves included, had questions over how it was all going to mesh together with all this firepower up top. But I think the 5-2-3-3-4-3 has been great so far. I think it has done that. It's been able to get the best out of almost everyone. I do think, however, there have been some causes for concerns, and being slightly overly aggressive at times. Again, of course, that comes with the upside of all those goals scored, that pressure up high, making it difficult for teams to play against. But we did see that break down a few occasions, that game against Charlotte. I also think about the game at home against Kansas, where, if it goes wrong, we do have that risk of getting blown out at times. Um, as previously mentioned as well, this is a results-based business. I think that some of the home games, like you mentioned, that we weren't able to take as much of an advantage of, is it does kind of bring the grade down a bit. But overall, I've been really impressed what he's done with players like LaRue, right? Who was on the Town FC. I hope no one forgets. Players like Muni, who have been really good, who we didn't really have much trust in this time last season. Again, with the draft picks, and we praised him at the beginning of the season about how he doesn't really care about your name or your status. If he thinks you're playing well, he's gonna play you, and if he thinks that you're not holding up your own, then you're not gonna get played. And I think that competition, also Boot is another name that gets thrown in there. Playing Judd here and there, I think it's been really good. One drawback that I do have, you might think this is a bit harsh on Bruce Arena, is I personally have some concerns about Hernan Lopez. I think that he has not been able to get up and running. This is a record transfer. And I also think it's important not to forget that this is a player who had 12 goal contributions last season in 30 matches. And of course, I've been frustrated with Hernan. I know you've been frustrated with Hernan as well, as many of us fans have been. But I still think that the version of Hernan, I don't know if it's just because of the injury or what, but the version that we're seeing of Hernan right now is not at the level we were seeing last season. And that's questionable how much of that is the fault of Bruce Arena. But I do think that that is something that weighs him down slightly just because of how much importance he should be having in this team, given the transfer fee we paid and the kind of wages he is on.
It's interesting because you had all the same pros and cons that I had, but my grading was actually pretty different. I gave a raw of an A minus, but a curved of an A plus. For the raw grade, yeah, I gave it an A minus just because while all of these other categories, the Quakes are playing really well, like you mentioned, there are a few spots that we expected more, especially particularly with playing at home and wanting to get more games out of that. And then also just the position in the table. I think because of those things, I can't go any higher than an A minus. But then I curved it to an A plus, particularly because of the way that Bruce Arena approaches all these games. There isn't one set formation, there isn't one fixed lineup. And even when we would win games, there would be changes in the lineup the next game. And we would all be questioning and thinking, okay, what is Bruce thinking? And even like the first game of the season, right? RSL, we see Bo LaRue and we're like, who is this kid, right? We, at least for the people that don't follow the Town FC closely. And we saw a lot of different names and, you know, the resurrection of, I don't know if resurrection is the right word, but like Preston Judd, Daniel Muni, Jamar Ricketts, players that honestly were pretty overlooked last season. And he's been able to kind of bring them back into like serious contention as starters while also being able to bring in and integrate the new players like Bolaru, who is so young from the draft. And also the way that he prioritizes games. And maybe this isn't just Bruce Arena calling the shots, right? But the way he rotated against New England, this is something that I've been dying to see by so many other coaches to take the US Open Cup seriously. And we finally able to see that. I think Bruce Arena's priorities in terms of which games are important are correct. To play, you know, our best lineup on a Wednesday away at Galaxy to then rotate on a Saturday at St. Louis, that isn't something that we would typically see. The Wednesday games are usually when you see rotation, and the Saturday games are, you know, primetime TV, if you can call it that. And to just disregard the big names, like you say, and just, you know, players that are on tremendous salaries like Hernan Lopez, like Pellegrino, even like Rodriguez at times, right? Like those big name players that we're like, okay, going into the season, these are probably going to be players that should be starting based on their wages. They're not starting. We're having the kids play at times. To have the courage and confidence in the players and to instill that confidence and this playing style into all these players, I don't think that can go overlooked. I think it's an A plus because we've never seen a coach do this with the Quakes. Well, I won't say never, but at least like in the PayPal Park era of the Quakes, we have not seen this.
Yeah, that makes sense. Honestly, I do think, you know, kind of as I was reading it a bit too, I think maybe like an A minus probably might be a bit, you know, would be merited, I think. I feel that Bruce Arena's grade can't stray away too far from the overall season grade, just because, of course, he's, you know, the manager. He's the one who is going to be steering the ship for how the season goes, and so to speak. On paper, this team and where it is on the season makes sense, you know? So it's not like he's overperforming too much, I think. But yeah, no, you're right. And yeah, I think that maybe an A minus is probably fair, I would say.
Yeah, but I do like the point that you're saying though, like the overall and the Bruce Arena grade have to be pretty similar. And for me, there's a big spread. But my last defense for that, I will say that yes, we have a lot of big name players, and yes, this squad, like just this raw talent of this team, should get us into playoffs. But I do think it's worth noting that these players probably would not be coming here if it weren't for Bruce Arena, right? Like if Luchi Gonzalez was still the coach, is
Right.
Chicho going to sign? Is Joseph going to sign? Probably not. Was anyone going to have the connections that Bruce has to, bring in so many players from the New England Revolution, whether we liked it or not at the time? It's so far so good, right? Like Harks, Romney, DeJuan Jones, those are solid players that are part of this team. They're integrated as like first team players now. So, and I mean, like I said, like Bolaru, he was literally available last season, and we had two coaches that didn't think of bringing him up. So, I think all of those small things, culture changes, play a lot and influence my grading of Bruce Arena, despite the overall team performance being lower.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, we talked about like the vibes as well, right? Like the team feels good right now. I think it's in a good spot. And that is also a big, a lot of credit for that has to go to Bruce Arena as well.
And so, towards concluding, if you had to give the Quakes one letter grade, just overall across all four categories, what would that average be?
Ooh, maybe it's like B plus, A minus. I think A minus probably.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, is with considering how many, we almost have as many points that we did all of last season. 1 point away. Or no, I think we were past it, right?
uh,
22? Didn't we get 21 last season?
yeah, we are past points
Yeah,
and
we're past.
past goals scored.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or actually, no, I think goals
So
scored we might be a couple behind, but it's like basically already there.
right there. Yeah. I think mentally as well, or yeah, there are a lot of new faces that don't kind of carry the baggage the last couple of seasons. But either way, to get the team to change so much. Like I feel like this is going somewhere in a way that I haven't felt in the past. I guess the first season of Lucci did kind of feel like that, but yeah, I think like A minus. It's not been perfect, but for how competitive the league is as well, I think an A minus is merited.
Yeah, I'd go with an A minus as well. Feeling good about the Quakes. So yeah, overall A minus. The Quakes are doing well. We'll have a little bit of a rest this week, and then back to more MLS games, back to Open Cup. Sky feels like it's truly the limit for this team, and hopefully the second half of the season is the same, if not better. So that's all from us. We'll catch you next time. Let us know what you're thinking. Thanks.